Good morning, everybody. This talk I'm calling The Merciful Ocean of Avalokitesvara's Love. And the talk is actually based on an imaginary person who sat a zazenkai for a day. It's based on the ruminations of this one. So, last Saturday was another day of doing nothing in an all-day meditation. All day long, we just sat together and learned in silence from each other. There was nothing to do except to meet the moment as it was, without dressing it up first. No schedules to keep outside, but we just sat for 30 minutes, stood up and walked mindfully for 10 minutes, and then sat down again. No demanding phone calls for something, just the natural sounds of the world outside or inside. If we could hear the crowd, if we could hear the thoughts in our mind or the sounds outside over the sounds that kept following us from the crowd that was coming along with a lot of nonsense and ideas. The chattering voices in our mind weren't very interesting, and mostly you just wish they would stop. But in a zazenkai, you just do your best anyway. Even so, the day was not what I expected. There was nothing to do all day except to live with ourselves without reprieve for 30 to 40 minutes at a time. And that sounds like a narcissist dream, doesn't it? Except that in a narcissist dream, we sit in comfort and bask in the adoration of all of the incredible charms of ourself. In a zazenkai, it was more like being chained to a flock of ill-natured children, complaining about time, position, atmosphere, noise, and all manner of misery, with the biggest whine of all coming from the back. Are we done yet? Not what we expected. It was just us, nothing else. And the longer we sat, the more we began to look suspiciously like the boring individual that we imagine exists. But the worst of it all is that we were really annoyed by someone nearby who never stopped talking and had nothing nice to say about anything or anyone, even about us. I always thought I was an okay person, but this individual reminded me of so many things I'd like to forget. I think they must be someone who is very unhappy. So maybe if I sit quietly, this person will also just go away. But sitting quietly didn't help as much as I had hoped. I began to feel surrounded by too many beings complaining about something or other. They rattled my mind with so much talk that I became discouraged and I felt like quitting. I felt I could really use some help, even though there's nothing to see. It was just me on a cushion, but someone must surely understand how utterly miserable I became and that I'm drowning in stuff like words. Maybe if I continue to sit quietly, they will just leave because I don't want to leave. This is my day. Or I guess I could just count my breath. I think that annoys them enough to leave, or at least to quiet down. But what happened on the cushion eventually did calm down my disquiet of mind and body, and it was really amazing. One moment I was crowded in a really little space, frantic, and then the next everything quieted down, and I was just alone with my heartbeat and breath. So I began to breathe easier. I can do this, I think. But wait, I wasn't really alone, was I? Perhaps I have not been paying enough attention. What if there really is another who sits with us, whose compassion, patience, and endurance rescues us? Avalokitesvara, perhaps. Could we be so lucky? I'll have to remember that when I chant the Heart Sutra next. And so it goes throughout the day. On one little cushion, all of you, as you are, wrestle with a gigantic self that That is, you struggled with a self and unknown to you, possibly with the help of Avalokitesvara. Could that really be? But then the sutras say Avalokitesvara hears the cries of the world. So if she hears cries for help from anyone, that would be me too, wouldn't it? I like to keep that in mind to consider. Could the heartbeat that we're left with when the unruly crowd leaves be Avalokitesvara's heartbeat, or both of us? Like a mother who hovers close to her children when they cry. And what of one's breath, body, speech, and mind? Whose are they? That's more to think about for me. I'll have to look more closely. If Avalokitesvara assists with us and does not shy from our misery, then what does that mean? If we consider that with a dispassionate mind, there is nothing we can point to in our success and say, look, I did this. Isn't that amazing? One minute I felt terrible, and the next I was so calm and quiet. Why can't I personally claim it? Because everything important happened in the dark. So there is nothing to point to, nothing to brag about, not even something to feel satisfied about. But the truth is that we were rescued from the rough seas, not from any ocean, but from the merciful ocean of Avalokitesvara's love. Looking back on this day-long practice now, I think that we're slowly discovering that practice involves more than just us and the conditions themselves, but it works more subtly and unconditionally. I think that we're way more lucky than we deserve. In spite of our ignorance, maybe we only come to understand that to the degree that we really practice. Finally, I think that we really have a lot to be grateful for. Thank you. One more voice to quiet. Here's Peter with us now.
And Mark with the tissues. Oh, okay, that's almost that.
Thank you.
Anybody have any comments or?
Want to add to the commentary? Yes, Sandy?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, great. It worked. Your talk brought back my beginnings with zazen, zazenkai, and the voice in my head going, is it over yet? When will it end? Is it over yet? It's like every kind of thing possible seemed to pop into my mind to take me away from where I was, from just trying to be there. And it's hard to think that, when you finally relax and just be there, just don't try anything, just don't try to escape that feeling of panic that you just have to get out. There's just, I can't sit here like this anymore. It disappears, or it starts to disappear anyway, but it does continue if you really just try not to do anything. And it took a long time for my panicky voices, the ones that were, get me out of here. I'm cramping, my legs are hurting, my back's hurting, to start to calm down and level out. So I think it's something everybody probably goes through when they first come into practice.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to imagine that anyone can just, unless they've meditated, can just sit down and be there.
Yeah.
So thank you for the memories. I appreciated your talk.
Mark?
You preface this with this being about an imaginary person. But as I was listening, I imagined Jane as this imaginary
As you imagine
person.
very well, it was me.
Really?
It was me deluded.
Right. And you sounded like,
I had
yes.
many more frantic moments. I had more of the are we there yet feelings, a lot more.
So it's like the little kid in you going, are we there yet?
Yeah,
Can we get there? Can we stop? Can we get out?
yeah. So we're always asking Avalokitesvara for our help. And am I there yet? How much longer is this going to go on?
Did you come up with an answer?
No, the answer is just where I am now, which is what it is.
I imagine this is what everyone can relate to, because I too have been there on that cushion on a bad day,
Yeah,
or just maybe even in daily life,
yeah,
walking around having to do things, going, are we there yet?
yeah.
So there is no answer, right? Or what is the answer?
I don't know if there is an answer or is not an answer. It's just that where we are is we're here, and that's it. For me, it's here in a wheelchair or here in a walker. For everybody, it's different, but this is the are we there yet answer for now. And everything changes, so I have hopes that this will change too. I still keep asking, am I there yet?
Well, let us know when you get there.
I will. Why am I not there yet?
Mike?
Mike?
I loved your talk, and it took me 5 to 6 months to be able to say the word Avalokitesvara. I kept tripping up over that. Are we there yet? Used to be the one statement that would get my father so angry at us and just say, just enjoy the ride. We'll get there when we get there, you know? And so, when I listen to your talk, I sometimes think that Avalokitesvara maybe should be the god of endurance. You know, as much as kindness and stuff, because my meditations when I first joined Beginner's Mind were nightmares for me. I kept fussing and my brain was going 90 miles an hour and stuff. And after all these years, it slowed down a little bit. And I have come to the conclusion that there is no there to get to. So are we there yet? You never will be there yet, because there it doesn't exist. It's, you know, it's the you know, the road we're on. And so I've found that, yes, I still suffer when I sit. My back still hurts, my leg still hurts. But I've kind of taken meditation and turned it into a time machine where I try to just let all of a sudden, you know, I've had moments where when the gong rings, I'm like, we're there? Oh, okay. So instead of saying, are we there yet? We're just like, we're already there. I just, you know, forgot, until I heard the gong ring. So thank you for your talk. It brought back some wonderful, painful memories of my first few days at Beginner's Mind.
It was funny, I started writing the talk, and I started it 4 or 5 days ago, and so every time we came to it, the perspective from which it was talking kept changing, and I had to keep going back and changing present to past, and then changing first person to third person. I was changing it all week until it came out finally. Like I was just too tired to do anymore.
You just had to accept that the talk was about you, and then that would make it all easier.
It was, yeah, it was certainly the way I think I resisted more than many people because uh, it just was so difficult. I would, my usual way was to start something very difficult, then to withdraw and go back into another situation that was easier and work on that for a while and then dip a foot in again in a difficult situation. And each time it seemed to get better, so I kept going back to it. So to just go headlong in it and boil in the water, that wasn't my style. It was to just dip my little finger in or something and then back off for a while.
Peter.
Did you have your hand up?
No, no, no.
Okay.
I'm just-
Peter, you don't have anything to say?
Arvid?
Thank you, Jane. I'm curious about the Heart Sutra, where it's Avalokitesvara who supposedly is speaking to Shariputra,
Yeah.
and talking about emptiness and form, talking about prajna, and it just feels odd that the embodiment of karuna is there, talking about prajna. I'm just curious about that.
That the embodiment of compassion is one?
Appears in the Heart Sutra talking about prajna, talking about this no form, no sensation, no perception, no formation, things like that. So it almost feels like Manjushri ought to be the person in the Heart Sutra.
Well, they come together with the Buddha, right? The triad of the three Buddhas is Shakyamuni Buddha in the center and Manjushri on one side and Avalokitesvara on the other, being aspects of Shakyamuni Buddha. Anyway, it seems quite natural to me that a person, a being, a bodhisattva could be so moved by compassion that they try to explain the world to somebody, that for me, it was a great relief to chant the Heart Sutra always. Because even though I didn't understand anything that I read, I still felt there was some truth in it that made this life more bearable. And so I always connected to Avalokitesvara as a bodhisattva, being a compassionate being enough to try to explain something that was not even explainable.
When I
think
read
that's
the Heart
compassion.
Sutra, I don't find it to be like I see like a a kind of description of a state of wisdom, but I don't see compassion. How is that seen there? Am I reading it wrong?
I think maybe you're missing a very important point, is in that when somebody tries to explain to another person why their suffering exists, but what they're trying to explain is unspeakable, as it were, and yet they still try. Because sometimes, even though we don't understand a word of it, something in us does, and we hang around because of it. So
Yeah, let me answer something here. There's a couple of answers for this, but in the case of that, Avalokitesvara is speaking to us. But what is Avalokitesvara saying? Avalokitesvara is listening to all of us who have zazen and a zazenkai like Jane just portrayed for us, And it's telling you, don't worry. These are the things that are going to happen to you. Everything will be fine. And that's compassionate. That's how the teaching is compassionate. And perhaps that's the best explanation. There's a further one, which is just historical or scholastic, and that is that Avalokitesvara really didn't seemingly take the function of compassion, particularly until it got to China, and therefore the form that we like so much of Kuan Yin, which is the name in China, of the merciful person, began, I don't know the exact time, but it began certainly 1,000 years, probably after the Heart Sutra was written. So that's another reason for why seems to be a discrepancy. Avalokitesvara, represents the most advanced state before becoming a Buddha.
And also, are you done?
No, and that's how it's and that's how it is in the Heart Sutra. That's what this all five skandhas are empty is a very, although it sounds kind of silly or something, but that's exactly what the final state is, to truly understand that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think also Avalokitesvara is part of a triad, and therefore, when she was speaking with all three.
Yes, as Jane said just now, on altars, there's a Buddha, and often there are bodhisattvas on both sides, and depending upon who the Buddha is, the bodhisattvas change. But in the case of Shakyamuni, then on one side is Manjushri, who is of course the bodhisattva, not the Buddha, the bodhisattva of wisdom or of understanding or prajna. That's why it's called Prajna Paramita Sutra, because it's the understanding of prajna, which is the highest form of the perfections. Okay? And then on the other side, of course, is Avalokitesvara, who although it gives this talk to us, is actually there in this case as being the personification of compassion. And so therefore, in the bodhisattva's mind, there are two things that are predominant: wisdom and compassion. And they go together. That without the other doesn't work. If someone just, pampers you and says to you, "Oh, okay, that's all you need. Don't worry about it. You'll be okay." Poor girl, poor guy. Okay, but on the other side, someone is there with the aspect of wisdom that will tell you something much more about yourself than that compassion would have said. But there are times in life when just talking about Buddhism doesn't work. I mean, so what, you say, if you haven't had any practice and you're talking about it, or you are practicing, but so therefore the other side is the compassion of support of bodhisattvas or by bodhisattvas of other persons. And
Yeah.
that support is extremely, both those aspects should be there in the teaching of Zen teachers.
Yeah, and when I was sitting the first years, and it was so difficult, the first time my mind calmed down, I sat there thinking about, how did I do that? That's incredible. I must have done something really good. But then I realized later that actually the bodhisattvas sit with us and they endure with us. That is, they share the misery with us in order to sit with us and help. And so I think that's one of the prime things, that we're never sitting alone, even though we think we are. That we're always sitting with the help of either the bodhisattvas or the lineage in some way. We're always receiving unknown help. That's why it takes place in the dark and we seldom ever know it, but it's there because it's the actual part of our practice that we don't know about it in the beginning, but we begin to sense it later as we're sitting.
You know, when I was first starting to practice, uh, uh, and I did my first 7 days sesshin, and actually it was only we actually had you know, it was 6:30 or early, I guess not, probably more like 4:30, 5 o'clock until 9 a.m. But anyway, what my the first time I did this, I was sitting between Richard Baker and another student who were both that we were all, of course, new, but they were 2 years newer than me, and they could sit like logs; they never moved. And I, of course, copied them, and also didn't move. But in the middle of the fourth day, I suddenly began to cry. This never happened again, but I began to cry, a bawl actually, and I just stood up, and the Buddha place, the Buddha hall, the Zendo, was on the second floor of the Japanese congregation's building, and I went down the stairs, which went to their own entrance, and I went down to the bottom of the stairs and kept, you know, and just sat there for a while, weeping a little bit, but just kind of mostly sat there. And then suddenly behind me, there was Suzuki Roshi. And he didn't say, "What are you doing, you baby? Get your ass back up there and start sitting again." He said, "Are you okay?" That's all it was. And I just said, "Yeah." And I stood and followed him up the stairs. And that was the end of it. That's compassion.
Yeah, that's
Are
really
you okay?
compassion.
Are you okay? Is that that's compassion? Even if the person you're looking at is kind of silly, you might say. It doesn't matter. That's compassion.
Sandy?
That's also skillful means.
Yeah,
In other words,
very.
knowing how to approach someone in the situation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that would be Manjushri, maybe wisdom.
yeah, that's right.
That's
Thank you. That
wisdom.
both were in there. Yes, that's very true.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm glad he helped you. Who knows where you'd be if he hadn't?
That's quite true. That's quite true. That's quite true. I could have. I didn't intend to bolt, but I could have bolted. Anybody could. Someone could have bolted, opened that door and left, and then be embarrassed about having cried and like that in the middle of everybody else being silent and never come back. But I just okay. That was over, and then I got up, and that was that. Yeah, back to sitting.
Yeah. So if we understand that no matter how we're sitting, good, bad, or indifferent, someone is always there sitting with us that we seldom realize. And we're always receiving the help of endurance and compassion from someone who is sharing it with us, not just sitting there free of it, but sitting there together with our misery. That's what's so important, I think.
Mark.
Oops. Well, it feels like that's really important
Yeah.
because when you're in that misery, you feel isolated, you feel unhelped, unconnected. It feels like a ball of sadness or anger or something that engulfs your life at that moment. And to know, to try to work through that and let these other, we could say, entities help us come back. I think that's a wonderful way a way of compassion and for yourself and a way back. because we wander off into some unusual states sometimes, and it's really wonderful to have that let's say a kind of gravitational force to come back to in some way.
Yeah, I think so. Anyway, I think it's just, we understand that more and more as we sit, but I think we don't understand it if we only do it sporadically or not with much spirit. But if you really put yourself into it to the degree that you sit like that, whether it's good, bad, or terrible zazen, whether you know, if your spirit when you sit is really there, then I think you start to understand you're not doing this alone, and you can't brag about the sense that you ever get to a point where you say, wow, this was a really silent and good zazen. I must be getting really good at this. And you can't ever say that, because you know you're sitting with the help of another, and that other never ever reveals itself. You just know when you're sitting there and you feel the presence of other within you, and you know that Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, when we always call on them, they do help. And my teacher in Japan really believed very much in Avalokitesvara, which is interesting because she had a statue of her on her main altar, a many-armed statue of her. And when I had a terrible time, she gave me a Avalokitesvara mantra to say to help me through it, which really did, to my surprise. So that was a case where she was working with body, speech, and mind, as well as me trying to get myself together. The speech was also helping me. But I think for me, it was always Avalokitesvara, just because Suzuki Roshi gave many talks about her when I first was in Tausahara. And he mentioned once that she was moved by sound. And I felt so akin to that I snapped on that point as being important. And because sound was so important to me, that I was listening, you know, and that, well, that makes sense to me, really makes sense. But he gave a lot of talks about him or her. I always thought of her as him, actually, till I came back to the States. In Japan, he's called Kanon, and I always thought of him as him. But now I think of him as her, because it doesn't make any difference. They're both Avalokitesvara, which is interesting. But anyway, when you start to do really well in Zazen, thank the Buddhists and Bodhisattvas for their help, and know that the real success comes from your connection. Rachel.
Thank you, Jane. My question, it might be a little labyrinthine, pretty convoluted, but you'll cut right through it. You or Peter will, so it won't matter. Can there sometimes be, and in the context of the Zendo word, unskillful means as though it was a tool to, a little more complicated compassion, where there had to be unskillful means to require that there be compassion later. What I'm referring to is, I have run across on more than one occasion unskillful means that I had to be resolute about, or I found myself being able to be resolute about, because for many years in early practice, it was just sitting, Avalokitesvara, or none of bodhisattvas weren't referenced in any way. And I remember once I'd had cancer and surgery. Anyway, when I returned to sesshin, my teacher then, Joko, said I could sit out the evenings, I could rest. And a long-term student of hers later, after the sesshin, commented to me that the Joko in the old days would never have done that. And so I got as though she were, older. And so she was giving me a break because she wasn't thinking clearly. I mean, and and that is not the only time I've run across unskillful means, and that for some reason, lucky me, I was the quiet recipient. And as you're talking, and I love your talk, but in other instances, I wonder if that's what I mean by convoluted way. I was in a situation of unskillful means precisely to sort of not coerce, but do you know what I mean? Where I really did have to, compassion really did have to reveal itself in less than direct ways, that the strength that was there was, I had to, how can I say, really discover that. It was not just sort of simply available, it wasn't like I could just get a drink of water. I had to sit and wait and dig the ground myself. It's just, I remember that and a few other things. And sometimes I was puzzled at how I could persist, regardless of odd things like that happening, that I just dismissed it. I didn't allow it to drive me out of the zendo, you might say. Anyway, I just wondered if you could respond.
Can you make a short question out of all that?
Is there? Oh, Jane, that's too hard for me. Can there be situations where, on what appears to be really difficult, unskillful, that it's almost the degree of difficulty that then brings out a compassion, but that it's not easily accessed, but even more remarkable when you do experience it?
Well, actually, that's pretty good. Just bring it all down to that simple. Yeah, I think there is a way. I think any way that works is skillful, and skillful means is not a set idea of what works and what doesn't work. Skillful means is what works in the moment, is what meets the moment in an appropriate way, not what is perfect behavior. So skillful means can be really anything, because we can be anything, and we can go up and down in unique ways. We can fall apart in strange ways, and we can get very aggressive in sudden ways. So skillful means person would have to be adaptable to all of that. So that means anything that works is a good skillful means from my point of view. And so we shouldn't be judging ourselves. Did I do that right? Or was that skillful enough? You just do what feels appropriate at that moment for the person. And that's compassion, I think. If it works, it's okay.
Anything else? Anybody?
Anybody want to challenge that?
We should probably.
I refuse to challenge that.
I was thinking in the movies, when the actor is in a very trying, scared situation with some kind of monster, and and begins screaming in hysteria, and somebody goes and slugs him to make him wake up, and see what the actual situation is. I think that's kind of like unskillful, skillful means.
Well, Japanese stories are all full of Zen masters beating their their students. So if you need to resort to that, I guess we'll have to put up with that.
Yeah, so I think that's what it comes down to, and that's probably why so many Zen masters did slug in the past.